I'm so excited that we're here to have this amazing conversation. This is one of the panels I was looking forward to the absolute most, and I'm so happy that it's happening. All day today we've been talking about the climate crisis, we've been talking about music, we've been talking about the music industry, and we can't have that conversation without also talking about the role of artists in Indigenous land struggles, and I can't think of two better people to talk about that with us today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Stefan Christoff, who's going to introduce Marlene Hale. Give it up.
Thank you so much, Eve. This conversation that we'll be sharing with you today is a moment, and it's one moment from quite a few years of exchange and conversation with Marlene Hale, who is a Wet'suwet'en elder, an awesome chef, celebrated Indigenous chef, specializing in new cuisine, and a really super on-the-ground committed activist who has worked tirelessly to build connections between climate justice movements, particularly Fridays for Future and youth-directed climate movements, and Indigenous land struggles, which is not a simple question or approach or situation to engage with. So we're going to be having a conversation. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge that Marlene traveled to be here, which is pretty serious. Marlene was close to her territory on the West Coast, close to Wet'suwet'en territory. So please welcome Marlene Hale.
Ladies and gentlemen and distinguished guests, my name is Marlene Hale and I am from the Wet'suwet'en Nation. Bonjour, comment ça va? C'est mon nom est Marlene. Je suis à partir de Colombie-Britannique Nord, une petite ville nommée Smithers. Mon peuple, le Wet'suwet'en de la Nation. Welcome. I am so happy to be back here to Bravo, Montreal. It's been 5.5 months since I have left for the long journey home back to my territory of Wet'suwet'en Nation. Merci for coming. Okay.
Please give me a So just a cue on the slides, please, if possible. Oh, great. So there's a lot to go over, and we won't be able to cover everything in this conversation, but we'll try to address as many things as we can. I think that a lot of people here will remember when Wet'suwet'en Nation shot to the international headlines. This, of course, didn't come from nowhere. There was generations of organizing for the land that took place. But that was the first time that people in cities around the world responded and held protests and support actions. Despite all the attention, the pipeline continues to be built, the Coastal GasLink Pipeline, on your traditional territory. So maybe just given that this is not a focus in mainstream news, we're here to get today, and many people are still talking about it, but sort of outside of the spotlight. If you could just give a sense of where things are at today, and also any thoughts to share about why it's important to see the long term of these struggles. You know, how do we address these struggles when they're not in the headlines? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. When you look at behind me, when you see this artist, I remember that time. This was earlier on in, and it was usually when we do things out in the cold in Montreal. That's where it's too warm for me. I need to be minus 30, you know, to get the work that I do. And that's when we really hit the streets in Montreal. Depuis January the 8th, we'll go back to 2019. It's a day I'm sure that every Wet'suwet'en would love to go back to. It goes back to a time of January the 7th when I got a phone call from my sister, who's been on the phone tireless with me daily on a basis where things were transpiring for up to 6 months of when the Coastal GasLink, which is CGL, came up and put an injunction on our territory. And it started in one of the nations of Gidimt'en, where the world has seen that, what has transpired there. When they went in, my sister called me, and she's where she lives in the tiny town of Smithers, BC, which is in the Hudson Bay Mountains. It's a beautiful little alpine town. And across the street where she lives is a huge big bus. And I could not get the words from her, but she said it's full of RCMP with tactical guns, not just with rifles and handguns, what you normally see on the streets. And they are heading up to get them down. Only the day before that was Molly Wickham, who's a Slato, one of the chiefs up there. We all know her very well. And she was up there with elders and children, and they were having chili and bannock and singing and drumming and just having a great time until the call came through. And when that call came through, it was the most horrifying time for us not knowing what was happening there. As we know, there was only 14 people up there. And between that bus and all of the other vehicles behind it, over 40 of them, was 124 police with tactical rifles. Half of them, some of them in the trees. And when they went in, I could still remember the movie or the film of Invasion, which I cannot look at anymore. And I could still hear that voice of Mr. Sutherland, a young man who was just yelling down to the police, "Don't point that at me. Don't point that at me." It's all he could say. "You are committing genocide. This is genocide on our people." And they took them hours to get through the barricade with Molly, who was just speaking not too long ago, about a week ago in Victoria. I went to go listen to her, and she was speaking at the end of her talk about how many times in the last 2 years, 3 years, she'd had a rifle, tactical rifle, pointed at her. And with her children playing, she could not have a day with peace with her own family, which she's raising up there, without having snipers in the trees behind them. And we finally got together in Victoria just last week. This is the first time I've seen any of them. I've been gone for 5.5 months. I left in May. I stopped doing my work here in Montreal, because if I didn't, I would never get home. It's been 3.5 years since I've seen family, my medical, and the territory, which I still haven't gone up to. But I was in Smithers. It was my first time being home with my people, which has got to be one of the toughest things, Stefan. I'm sitting across from you. You're my cousin Victor. We grew up together. You have a chief's name. Your mom and dad were my best best aunts and uncles. I loved it dearly. You carry a name which holds treasure with all of my sisters. I have 7 sisters. And in my family, you're just one we always look up to. But you broke my heart. You signed us away. And you're the chief. So how do we deal with this? I have to go home. I'm sitting in a big feast house, and you're there. You don't know how and what to say to me, because you know my role in this whole situation. You know I am the biggest troublemaker of an activist there ever will be for Wet'suwet'en. So you have no words for me. You don't know whether to kick the floor or to look up, look left or right. You have to somehow face me. But I'm there. I'm with my people. We had just gotten into our feast house, the whole community, because we just had our language renewed, and we just got a new dictionary of the Wet'suwet'en language. So everybody who is anybody was there in that hall. It was a nice thing for me to get back to in May. Beautiful time.
So just to give a bit of context maybe for people, unfortunately there was some traditional chiefs,
Yes.
including the person you mentioned, who did support the pipeline. And it brings up so much about the strength and the burden that and the struggle that so many people, including yourself from the Wet'suwet'en Nation, carry in regards to trying to translate what's happening locally to people outside, which is not always simple. So when we were talking in the last few years, one conversation, and I think it's really meaningful to hear about these recent experiences you had with, various people in your community who didn't necessarily have the same point of view about Coastal GasLink Pipeline. But how has it been for you to try to translate this reality on the ground within the Wet'suwet'en Nation to people outside, to try to find points of communication? And I mention this because, one thing after we talked, and I initially spoke with activists and artists in Ganawagi and Ganasatagi saying, what could we do locally to speak about Wet'suwet'en? And everybody suggested to speak with you. And we organized a series of events. So how has it been for you to try to communicate and to share Wet'suwet'en's struggle with all its complexities with people outside? Because it's not a simple situation, obviously.
It's really quite easy for me because I carry many hats. And as you see behind me, I'm a chef by trade. To all the little kids that I have taught, I've taught over 10,000 children all over Canada. And I'm known as Chef Malou. So Malou is my traditional name. It was given to my mom ever since I was 6 years old. And all the traditional chiefs and whatnot, when I come into the feast house, Malou pants, ever since I was a kid up to now. And I've always gone home. And even today, I was asking, I phoned the hereditary chief just the other day to ask him permission on something I was doing. He said, you have absolutely. And speaking of the chiefs that we're for, the hereditary chiefs that we're for the pipelines has got to be the hardest, because today, 4 days ago, he passed away, and he's the biggest hereditary chief up in our nation. And we've just taken him into his last journey home. And Russell Tiljo, his wife Elsie, all their family are from the Gitsan Nation. And they are all for the pipeline. But they're still my people. When it goes down to it, we're still all Wet'suwet'en. We never forget who we are and where we come from. And as the ancestors would like us to do our work diligently, and at a time like this, it's a test of our time. It's a test today for us to say goodbye to him and let him rest in peace and still respect what he stood for and how he stood for it and why he stood for it with his family and his nation. Mm-hmm. And it is what it is what it is. We just try that a little bit harder.
And you described sitting next to a traditional chief in a social gathering where you don't have the same opinion. But you have successfully tried to communicate and very meaningfully shared what's happening in Wet'suwet'en with people in Montreal, both artists, student activists, many people in the city. So can you talk a bit about why that effort was important for you? We worked together to create an artist letter, and more than 100 local artists signed it, and we did a media conference. I know you have a lot going on with the community back home, but also your climate justice work. Why was it important for you to try to appeal to artists specifically?
Well, you know what Montreal is. You look at, this is the most beautiful city in the world to me. I've been here since 2012, and I have mentioned to my family, to my people, to people in Vancouver where I've lived all my life, this is home to me. I love Montreal. It's very diverse. I learned to speak French. I know so many people. And when it comes to the activism world, this is where it is very strong. And it has been with the Divest McGill when we went in with RBC. That was strong. It was really a toughest time because it was still COVID, and when they did they took over and they had to close it. It was so sad because the COVID ran in, got them, and they had to shut it down. But they did even better at the Université de Montréal. They were successful with their divestment, where they first of all, they got the respect of the university, which everyone is fighting for, especially at McGill. And they came to McGill at the university to see what it was doing so they could know how it was that they would do theirs when they had their sit-in. And they showed who they were very, very hard. I really loved how they're very organized in it. And it was a year doing that, right? We worked on it a long time.
So at University of Montreal and at McGill, these student groups took action. I don't know all the specifics about University of Montreal, but I'm much more familiar with McGill, so I'll just mention the university invests over $4.7 million a year in the pipeline that Marlene's been talking about. So that's an annual investment, and that's through the investment fund of the university. And it's been made very public through these actions that students have taken to highlight this fact. And the university, and Marlene mentioned working a year, one of the things was to sign a letter by many alumni, professors, and students to ask the university and demand that the university cut those investments. So I think, like, in terms of understanding, your engagement with both artists and students, how has that been for you to talk about, because you're dealing with all the stuff at home, some hereditary chiefs aren't supporting the actions against the pipeline, some are. I'm sure within each family there's many complexities, but you're here in the city. How has it been to work with artists and students? You've talked a lot about the Wet'suwet'en land struggle and climate justice also, and made that connection. How has that process been for you?
Well, the process, the students, number one, they're not students, they're all my little troublemakers. There's you've got troublemakers all over Canada. And everybody wants to now be my troublemaker. I've even got 86 years old, said, can I be one of your troublemakers? As you know, I have an online webinar that I hold every Friday. I have been since the pandemic hit. And I've been really doing so much work right on that. And right at McGill, where the students come in, what you were talking about, we would hold rallies and be at them with a lot of the key people always in Montreal beside me. I always had to have a Mohawk. I've always been fortunate to have the Mohawk standing in solidarity beside us and always with me. And also other key people of Quebec. And today I have Alex Tyrrell, for instance. He's with the head of the Green Party, and he's always been with Indigenous issues. And I really appreciate, solidarity that we have and that with others who came with the students at McGill. They were coming in heavy. They did an amazing, amazing job of it. I really appreciate. Still keep it. I saw a lot of them yesterday.
So the images that you're seeing are actually from a rally at the main administration building at McGill, and basically what was happening in this action is, as Marlene was talking about, this process of organizing with the students, that took about a year. So we're actually delivering the petition signed by alumni and student activists to the administration. And also, students were asking for a meeting. They didn't respond, but I think at least 1,000 people from McGill signed it. I don't remember the number.
The action in the end, it's still not finished. You know, it was still, I'm sure, no, with the kids it isn't. They're never happy with the results what they get from university. They still got to push a little bit more, which is what I want them to do. And the key people that were standing also that spoke that night, you know, in -20 or whatever, when the day I came back again. So with the people that we have with us, that you had working with the students as well. It is a lot of work trying to work in the hardest times of our time of the pandemic. And so it was always had to be like where we are out in the streets, -20, no such thing as getting inside and warm. So yeah, it was a struggle, because I know one of the biggest struggles I had was looking for a washroom every time I was walking.
So in terms of people understanding a bit more about like how this, I think, you know, often people will say, okay, well, this Wet'suwet'en land struggle is happening really far away. And one thing we talked about a lot was, how do we illustrate to people the connection between the pipeline and institutions in Montreal? One example is McGill, but there's others. Unfortunately, many banks are investing in the pipeline. Many investment funds, RRSPs are investing. TD Bank, for example, has, RBC Bank has investments. Why was it important to show, you know, you always talk about show me the money, where's the money trail? Why, can you talk a bit more about why that's a focus in your work?
Well, absolutely, because, you know, when you look at a corporation, all corporations, you look at the money trail, it's $70 billion in Coastal GasLink. $70 billion, you try to find out the money, where we do the money trail, and we have been following it through the bank system. And when I get into the banking system, we see other things that get away with it. And where you see always, every time you look at a big event that's happening, a bank has just endorsed it. And they are endorsing many Indigenous things that's making me so angry. And that is huge for us to dig deeper, because through that I find out a lot of things. I have a group of people called Research for the Frontlines, and Jen Gabi, and they've been doing, they're professional researchers, and they research anything and everything that I need to do for the work that I do. And a lot of the things that we have been finding out is just exactly that, where the money trail is, who's got the money, and who's handing and who's buying who. And it was like when I also said to Prime Minister Trudeau when I addressed him on January the 19th of 2019, and you know, every question I asked him in the town hall of, was at Saint Jerome that night, I still stunned him that night. He would not believe at a town hall that the second person to the last he'd point to me. I stood up and did not realize he was going to be talking to a Wet'suwet'en. And one of the things that we ask the government too, and we are still asking through the Memorandum of Understanding, many things through the Wet'suwet'en people, who owns who? Who's given who the entitlement of what they're doing on Indigenous lands? Yesterday, when I'm listening to him, it's Orange Shirt Day. It's National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. It's a really important day for us Indigenous people. So as I'm going from one event to the other, and I'm walking through the streets of Montreal, we're stopping at a place where across at McGill, where we spend a lot of time in front of those monuments, talking and rallying, and knowing that the police who are taking care of every rally how much money is going into policing and many other things and issues, which is another big issue that I have, but we'll just stick to this one, the basics for now.
So in terms of these rallies that you're describing, and there's been so many, I can't remember, which is showing also the persistence and the effort and the organizing to continue even when Wet'suwet'en Nation is not in the headlines, which is not simple to get media coverage in that type of context, to get attention, to get people to respond, to get people to mobilize. You know, it's really great to see people here today. One thing I noticed in all of these rallies, as was the case today with the drum, art has always been an important part. We also worked on that artist letter. Why has art and music been important for you in terms of your presence at protests, both your drumming, but also the music, you know, the banners that you hold? Can you talk a bit about why that's an important part of this process for you?
Oh, that's my best part. You know, I just gave you a quote, and that quote, read it off, it's so beautiful. It was said to me by a beautiful lady, Nadine Saint Louis, and she brings in a lot of artists. She has the beautiful art gallery in Old Montreal called Ashokan. And yesterday I was at the law department of the University de Montreal, and she was just talking about this quote, and I wrote it down because I loved it.
Marlene asked me to write it down. So artists are key keepers of the past and the bridge builders for the future.
So, you know, you see that in their words and their, you know, their platform. They have a big platform. And the artists that I've been working for and with, rather in the Wet'suwet'en struggle in the past, Montreal, and since our story first broke out in 2019, a lot of them are rap artists, so I would do a talk like I am doing today. They would sit and listen to me for an hour, and they'd write down what I'm talking about. Then they would put that into song, and then we put it into a video up at Montreal. Other artists would sit there and they would listen to me, and that's the very first picture you showed. That's how she does her interviews. And this was another one that was in minus 20. We're sitting outside with all, it was, I remember the beautiful place we were, and she just drew all of the panelists. And I carry so much with the words and the vision that I have for our people, and a lot of it is through artists. A lot of them have sang songs and written songs about the pipelines. A lot of them have one wrote a beautiful song on genocide. It sounds like I say beautiful, but it's the truth. And he has written that. So artists are our best friends when it comes to putting the word out to anything of what you need, what you are working on the day of.
Often people will see like a situation like the Wet'suwet'en Nation. You know, many people have mentioned this, I'm sure, to you. I've heard it, you know, it comes up, what can we do? How do we act? You know, there's a lot of like questioning also about, you know, how can people express support? Wet'suwet'en Nation is a very particular context where a lot of activists have called on people to act very clearly, have called on artists to mobilize, you know, have called on there to be support actions. But I think often people might get a bit intimidated or not understand how to take action or express support. You know, do you have any thoughts about like the importance of people acting rather than being fearful about trying to express their support?
It's hard to do both, especially in the last tough years that we have through this pandemic. It's hard to get anybody to come out and, you know, of your own homes. And we're still trying to live through that cocoon of putting the 2 years behind us. But putting into action is what it is. It's not only going out there and being in a rally for 2 hours and walking half through the city with platforms, placards, and with it. It's calling your government, getting people down to action where they have a lot in the West for RBC. A lot of my people in Vancouver Island, especially with Extinction Rebellion, a lot of the movements, They have gone on hunger strikes. They have glued themselves to the RBC. They have done so many things in action that they just got right under, the politicians' Horgan, for one, and organized crime, I call them. And they really got to where the important places for putting the action to words. And the best one that I find in Victoria, BC, was all the elders, where 100 of them walked up a mountain for Fairy Creek, which I was at also for 6 months, and are there for Wet'suwet'en as well. I have been invited to homes, to artists, and speaking of artists, and stayed with this lady. She's 86 years old, Marion Cummin, love her dearly. And she's got Wet'suwet'en art all over her house. She's put them into placards. She's put them into gift cards, sends them everywhere, and she's just madly in love with the hereditary chiefs, and also Unistoten. And she's written, and she's gave me a big gift to give to the hereditary chiefs when I go back, and also for Frida Houston. And she loves the image when she was dancing around with the red dresses. And artists like her to be totally commended for. We really totally need them, that's for sure.
You mentioned Frida Houston, who's also featured in that film Invasion. I would encourage people to look up the film if you haven't seen it. You can find it on YouTube. It's actually hosted by Unistoten. It's free. That was the whole intention of the film. There's quite a few filmmakers involved in producing that. Frida, who's mentioned from the Wet'suwet'en Nation, is in the film. So do look it up. It's on YouTube. In terms of thinking about how to sustain protests and how to sustain your involvement, we've talked about this over dinner at different times. One thing you do a lot is cooking, and that's your trade. And you're also known for your efforts to share Indigenous cuisine within various contexts, both here and in Vancouver and different places. So often people, one question that comes up a lot in activism is like, what are the other things that people do to sustain culture, to sustain momentum and sense of, a sense of vibe when you're trying to sustain a campaign? Has cooking played a part, and Indigenous cuisine, has that been important for you throughout this
Well,
time?
my motto is with kids, you never panic. You know why? Because there's always bannock. And that's where I am with them. They're with me in the kitchen. They're learning to cook our traditional food. Then we sit around a big table, and we should sit there and we share things. And then I just talk to them. I just find a way to talk in a sense where it's not going to scare them. It's not a good story. It's not a pretty story. And I let them do the cooking. When they're eating, they ask the questions, and I'm there for them. Then we get into that to an older group. And everywhere I go, my chef's jacket is in my suitcase, and I don't go into a place if you got a kitchen, I'm there, usually behind the stove. And always talking about, okay, today we're doing salmon, we're in the West, I just came from, and salmon is still abundant there, and it's just a way to bring people out through food, always has. I'll feed you, then I'll talk to you. And with the kids, I start with them young, 6 years old. Tout le français, anglais, and I've done a few in Spanish, about 60 students from Mexico. They wanted to learn about our nation as well. And it was just really neat. Before we spoke, we did some cooking. And that's a way to anyone's heart, right? So yeah, that's me in my chef's jacket. On my jacket, you'll see it's a little frog, and that resembles, and it's also with my hat. It's because I'm from the Lexilio clan, and the little frog that I have is we're from the little small frog clan. And on the back of it, I've embroidered about 7 jackets that I have with salmon. That's my lover. We are the salmon people. And so through what I wear is my stories and my drum, which I have carried all around the world with me. And it doesn't leave my side. And I've been to the biggest part of dealing with children and other activists, which is really important, which was in Panama City, where I spoke to 23 countries of the Latin Americas about the indigenous struggles of the Wet'suwet'en Nation.
Thank you, Marlene. Maybe just one final question, and I want to have time for people to have questions, because I'm sure you do. But just in terms of the importance of sustaining, focus on Wet'suwet'en today, because that was part of the, we had a discussion about why we could do this event and what we could try to get out of it. There's been, a lot of attention during a very specific moment on the Wet'suwet'en Nation, and that, has sustained by some activists, but it hasn't sustained in a sort of broader pop culture sense. But why is it important that we sort of see these struggles and these solidarity efforts in a long term, and see that, okay, well, maybe it's not like a very like very much headline focus right now, but it's something that is going to take years. So if you have any thoughts about that sort of view of solidarity and action and climate justice and the experiences in relation to those issues from the Wet'suwet'en Nation.
It is really true, because in one sense, Stefan, it's really good to be a good ally. It is good to carry on allyship. It's very important. And not only to be a good ally, is to really be out there and understand the struggle with the people you're fighting for. And like many people, through a lot of politicians, I say, you have to go to the territory. You have to go visit the people. You have to sit down with the elders, look at the children, see how the education is doing, see how their language is doing, and how they are living as a community, to be there to understand what the struggle is all about. And for me to do that, I do it in baby steps. I go home, I just want to rekindle with my people and my family. From then on, they all know I am the Eastern voice for the Wet'suwet'en Nation. I have gone home armed with something I'm going to finally release, and it's called, it's a documentary called Coming Home to Wet'suwet'en. And it was something I was very proud, and the fellow that did this filming with me is Ali. I love you to death. We worked on it for so long, and I had to give him the sad news that we had to put it down for a bit, because it speaks a lot of the residential school, my parents, my uncles, and our time there. It was not a good time. I had to ask him to just let it rest for a bit until I was ready. Well, now I'm ready, and I am going to be releasing that when I do go home to Smithers, BC. I'm flying back to Vancouver tomorrow and to Smithers, BC on Monday. And I'll be there with our people, with our town, and first of all, with the mayor of Smithers. Her name is Gladys Tooten, and she is so happy to have me there to speak and doing a workshop on systemic racism, which is the film now that we're working on all across the country.
So thank you so much, Marlene, for your time and presence today. Maybe we'll just have a round of applause for Marlene.
Merci beaucoup.
So we wanted to make sure to have time for discussion, so I'm not sure where I think, okay. Yeah, so if you have a question, please approach the microphone. Any questions? Okay.
She's got her hand up right here. Yeah. Absolutely. Unsavory. I have a group of researchers that do anything that I ask for. And one of the things, like, so let's say, for example, we're doing something on systemic racism. So right now we have professional researchers, and they're looking at not just, like, everybody's got systemic racism no matter what field, from the government, health, to you name it, has got issues. Joyce Echequan is the hugest one, 2 days ago, of the health, of the disasters that happens. So going to the money, it's a real tough one because they can hide it really good. And the reason I say that, I just finished traveling in BC, and powwows is secondary to us. It is part of our culture. It's ingrained in with us. I was in Kamloops, BC, where the 215 children just started. And in June, they had a big powwow. I spoke to them in the arena there. It was 43 degrees. I told them I only got 10 minutes. I cannot be out in that field anymore. And afterwards, somebody just came up behind me and said, I know you're an activist. There's something I need to share with you. These powwows are expensive to hold. And it was funded by CGL. So when you say it's hidden well, it's hidden well. $70 billion is easy to hide. They can do it through anything, just like money laundering. They're good at it. We have to be better at it, and then chasing them. Many things that I have been invited to in BC this whole summer was the same thing. They were, TMX was another one in Vancouver. They are funding many Indigenous, they're putting money everywhere. They're putting it in your face. Here's $250,000. This is going to help you have a good powwow. This is $500,000. It's just a gift. We don't need a receipt. Of course they don't need a receipt. And I wish you the best. Oh, what a nice guy. We'll take you on a fishing trip. In the meantime, you need a new boat. Well, let's just fix this up. It's the thing where we know we can, it's called, we can pick your Indian. How to pick your Indian. How to go to who for what you need. And how to hide things. How not to say nothing. Because once you sign that piece of paper, you're also signing the right to give the story.
So a lot of institutions like McGill and Concordia and also banks, there's a lot that's hidden, but there's also a lot that's very public, right? So I'm just as a
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's
yes.
a very clear example. Like when we were trying to when we were working on this letter and in collaboration with Divest McGill activists, and the Indigenous Student Alliance at McGill, we were trying to find like a local manifestation of CGL pipeline. And we just searched and did some research with some of the people that Marlene mentioned, and it's actually pretty transparent when it comes to like a big institutions like that. But then there's a lot that's hidden. But I would encourage people to like look up, is there investments in TC Energy? Is there investments in like various institutions that have a major stock in TC Energy? It's always interesting to see, and it's also a good starting point to think about how the pipeline is manifested on a local level, right? It's not just there. So sometimes it's hard to see, but sometimes it's also very in your face.
Well, this is where you call to action. You're right at it right now. You just wanted to find out something. Friend me on Facebook. I have 2 different Facebooks, one for my chefs and the other one for stuff I do. And there you can see on Marlene's webinar, Solidarity Action Group. And that's where my work is. You can message me, and then whatever you're trying to research, I will lead you on to some people who could maybe help you out with that, because it's good to know and it's a good call to action.
Any other questions?
So on our updates from the 5.5 months that I've spent in BC has been so hard in a sense where, like before, because I'm from BC, as you know, we are in the summertime, we got a lot of forest fires. We got a lot of flooding. There was a horrible one last year. And also I sort of managed to fight to get ahead of that this year, going up and down BC twice, up and down Vancouver Island, from one end to the other, visiting many people and family and seeing what there is. The one film that we're working on in Alert Bay, BC, for example, is the dwindling of salmon and decolonization, and seeing how the salmon is just dwindling. Where now, it used to be, you'd have 70 fish in a family would be nothing. But to put right now, the last 4 years, 2 fish per family, that's going to feed you through the whole winter, the whole time. And I was in the west coast of Vancouver Island, where you can see climate action does take its toll all through this province of British Columbia. There are bountiful of rivers. And when you go up to Smithers, Wet'suwet'en, and even through the city of Victoria, I was filming along rivers and lakes, and there was many of them, they were dried right up. That was really hard to put. There were some that the towns didn't even know that major roads were washed out. We're going up to the film, and somebody said, this road is gone. What happened to it? And this is what climate action is, just to be a big black hole. Nobody even knew about it. We just had we had a hard time turning around. And some we had to, just like a forest fire, you have to report it. Climate action with the children, as you know, today, you are all the 8th generation. You are the generation that is so important for us to do what we are. I have spoken to kids all across this map, and most of you that are going through the climate trauma, I've been with you in the hospitals in Victoria, BC, when you're being released at the Royal Jubilee. You're 22 years old. You're on the BC ferry, and you had just had it. You couldn't take it anymore. You started screaming to everybody around you about, don't you guys care what's going on? Do you not know what is going on in this world? What is going on with the salmon? I can't take this anymore. And she tried to jump off the ferry. She was stopped by the people, the ferry workers, held in a room, and I was just there at the Royal Jubilee to see someone else when she ran up to me and just hugged me. So glad to see someone that she recognized, and I just want to know one thing, how are you? When I get to Vancouver in May, I was gone right from there to a meeting with the Musqueam people, and like many nations are losing so many youth and young people who are terrified of this crisis of a climate. They cannot take another year. They can't force themselves to study. They went through 2 hard years of isolation in this pandemic. And I say to each and every one of them, I care for them. I care about what your future is all about. I care for you for the next 20 years, that you have something that we had. We had the opportunity, but you don't. You're worried about even next year. We can't look at, I've seen so many people across this land who have turned into throwing their televisions out. They don't see them anymore. They don't want to have to know what's going on. They would rather have families, would rather have them have a piano, do some sports activity, anything to get them off, and trying to get them off the Facebook and social media that's scaring them. And that's the biggest fight that I have for now, is the youth of today, the 8th generation. That's you.
So I wanted to just make sure, is there anybody else who has questions?
Absolutely, it'd be more than my pleasure to do that. And what is that is really good is to understand that the mental health and wellness of everyone right now through the policing, how I deal it with through systemic racism. For Indigenous people, exactly, not to do that, not to phone 911 and say you want to have a wellness check. That person will not survive. It is the truth. It is what it is. And many other things that I help talk to people about. And as in my travels in the last 6 months of talking from hereditary chiefs to the normal everyday person to the elders, the elderly, and to ageism, and to knowing that each and every age that we are today, there is a struggle. No matter what country you look at, we are in solidarity. We wear ribbon skirts, and I have a ribbon skirt that I have just had designed that I traveled with the last 5 months, and it's in the colors of the Ukrainian flag, and we are in solidarity with Ukraine. And I'm also now asked, I'm on many film things in Vancouver, Victoria, film festivals, and I'm asked to now to be in with Iran because I'm on the Iranian Film Festival in North Vancouver, and we work abroad with so many people. And we don't forget, we're not just the only ones. It's like when I went to Panama City. I couldn't speak about what happened to myself when I listened to 23 countries who were dealing with more. They died because they were an activist, because they spoke out. I'm lucky.
Just a note also, like a lot of people sort of bring up those types of questions about like how to approach, research on this topic, or like how to frame a divestment campaign, and these questions are so important. One thing that I've noticed was helpful in working with Marlene, but also to consult with Wet'suwet'en activists on the territory, which is what we went through that process, was to present something clear, like we are trying to do this, this is our idea. Not to say that this is final, but at least a starting point that can begin a conversation, rather than saying, we hope to do something about this in general. I think that it's important to try to present a specific action plan, and then that can be, and with the understanding that that can be adapted and shaped and worked on. I just wanted to share.
It's called consent, right?
I just wanted to share quickly a few context points. So this was the letter that was up on Cult Montreal, because I went through these slides, but I didn't share them. So a bunch of artists, including some friends in this room, respect, signed this artist letter. And this was actually the press conference to announce it. It was during the pandemic, so that's why it's outside. So you see Tasnim Rekik, who is an activist, a climate justice activist, and who has been very involved also in the campaign against Law 21. I just want to make sure that we know who's in the photos here. You also see Amanda Ruiz, who's an activist and an artist who's based in Oaxaca and has been building links between Mexico, across Turtle Island, basically. And this is a street art piece that I worked on and I shared with Marlene, and then we put it out on the street. This was actually before the statue was taken down, so it was sort of a premonition, I guess. Kevin Lowe designed that, and also this one during the protests that were taking place. And yeah, back to this. I just wanted to make sure to share a bit of context about the images that you saw and the people in them. So I'm not sure if there's more questions. Yeah, I have no idea what time it is or how long we've been speaking, so. Okay.
So I have a banner. You can walk up here, and the artists who are here, come up behind me with the banner. Who is here? The artist, you said. Ali. Just stand right behind me. This is what travels with me worldwide. I have this I've had this made for me in Montreal here, and I have been traveling all over the world. I just take it out of my drum bag, and with my drum, it expresses everything. And it was made in Montreal here, so it was just one of the expressions that we have, no matter where you go. And when I addressed Prime Minister Trudeau, I didn't have anything with me until a young lady sitting behind me took it out from underneath her top, another different one, and it had the same similar message, Pas de pipeline de territoire Wet'suwet'en. And so there's one for every event that you have. And you have the right key people when you all need to be in solidarity. Everyone that you've shown, from Kazim to Kevin Lowe to many other, this is a very diverse city. And you've been behind each and every one of them, the Palestinian. I have been following yourself, and you work tirelessly. We'll just turn the tides on you, and how you have worked along and not forgotten the Indigenous struggles, which is nice. And also, it is really important because you have also been doing a lot of this action on the radio. So we've been speaking in many different mediums, right? So getting the word out there with the McGill University of students behind us. The best university ever of students, the biggest troublemakers there are. They're qualified.
So these are some of the articles that were published that actually have specific details, like to talk about like the specifics of McGill's investment. So just sharing context on these slides. Yeah, and so I just wanted to say, is there any other questions?
Absolutely. Yinta is our territory. Yinta. When you go on to the website for Gidimdan Checkpoint, to write that down, you can go on to there, and that's Molly Wickham's. She will be talking to you, and also you can go on to the website of the hereditary chiefs of the Office of Wet'suwet'en in Smithers, BC, and it gives you all the education. And also on Unistoten as well. And so you could just click on any one of those, and also my website, because it just shows everything that I have been doing with the struggles of the Wet'suwet'en Nation. Also, because of the pandemic, where I found myself in Fairy Creek on the west coast of Vancouver Island, fighting for the old growth forest for the future, which is Brazil of BC. And I've been there for 6 months, doing both the work for the Wet'suwet'en and the Fairy Creek people. I will be there if it's needed, and it was needed. And Alex Tyrrell of the Green Party came up. When I asked him for his help, he's there on a dime, and that's what's needed. That's what you call real action, and that's where you really call solidarity. And you know, you take ownership of yourself, and you take ownership on this climate, and to doing your part is very well part. By you just doing the research of who's putting money into whatever you have is doing your part. It's a big thing. And by you going to your MLAs and going to Legault, and you can even go above him to the old Mr. Prime Minister Trudeau himself. And you know, we just lost the Queen. And there's so many things around the Queen. I loved her. She was our Queen. No matter what other people say, I still have my reasons is valid, and I will hold to that. And I feel that there's just so many things happening in our world that we have to take a little time for ourselves, for our own health and well-being, and to also remember the hardships of other people around this planet who are doing just worse than we are. And that's why we are all for wherever we can be. And we just be very careful, number one, of what we say, how we say it, of the words you use and how to pick and choose them carefully, and how you're talking to each other. Don't hurt each other. It's so easy not knowing that how other people beside you is having just as a tough a time as you are.
Thank you so much, Marlene, for sharing your presence today. And also to everybody who was here. Olivia, thanks for holding the banner. Zola, street artist, helped make that banner, should just mention. Also, you know, we all have our practices, and sometimes we can find commonality of points of action. I'm also a musician, and on that basis, I was really hoping to mobilize as many artist friends and, you know, collaborators as possible when we did this letter. So one project I did recently was I worked with a sound artist who was actually in the very far north and recorded sounds of the glaciers melting. And that's like one of the basis for this album I worked on as part of a project I do with Rev Sonar. So, you know, it's always interesting to try to think about how can we sustain our activist practice, but also our artistic practice, and think about, you know, sort of pacing ourselves over time. So I just wanted to also share a bit about that project that I worked on. I have a few copies. So I just wanted to say thank you so much to Eve and Pop Symposium. And of course, I just want to underline again, Marlene's traveled here for this event. It's very far and has just been, you know, through a lot of community events on the west coast of Turtle Island. So please give a big round of applause to Marlene for her presence today.
Thank you so much. Eve, thank you so much for inviting me here. And the Pop Symposium, it sounds like an awesome thing you've done for 5 days. It's a lot of work behind this, and I really appreciate, and you know, having me come and join me. We talked about this almost 5 months ago, and it was not, you don't have to worry, I will always be there. And also, thank you so much, Stefan Christoff, and we will still be seeing you, and we've still got a lot of work to do, and come and join us, and do come and join me on my Facebook, and you know, if you got work that you can do with us, let's do it. Take care, Masai.